All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday, everyone's favorite day of the week.
Oh, don't do that, George.
No yawning. Um, it's contagious. The yawning's contagious. So welcome to Monday. I hope everyone had a good weekend. This is week 11. This is social justice. Let's see who's here. So Vicky is here. Hello, Vicky. And Clara's here. Hi, Clara. Chan is here. Good morning, Chan. Gabrielle is here. Hi, Gabrielle. Sala's here. Good morning, Sala. Daniel is here. Hello, Daniel. Good evening to you, or very early morning to you. Shamimu's here. Hello. Miles is here. Good morning, Miles. And Daniel's here. Hola. Okay, so on Friday, we were talking a little bit about, again, First Nations people in Canada and their experience, and we were talking a little bit about reconciliation, because there's a dark past here. There's kind of an ugly story about what happened to Indigenous people in the sort of context of Canadian history and in the creation of Canada as a country. But we shouldn't just think of them as, part of the past, because of course these people are part of the present. As we saw in part of the video on Friday, these people are living and working alongside us and taking public transit, and so they're not in the past, they're very much in the present. And so we said that, or we were watching this documentary called Eighth Fire, and as I mentioned, I think I guess it would make sense if there were 8 parts to it. Maybe there's only 6, but there's a few different parts to this documentary. We're just watching one, and it has to do with Indigenous people's experience in cities, right? So this is the first one of 6 or 8 or however many there are. And so we said, of course, that this documentary was hosted by this guy, Wab Kinew, who is an Indigenous person from Ontario. He's had a career doing all kinds of different things, from musician to radio and television host to political party leader. So he's been very active and doing lots of things. And on Friday we were watching this video, and I asked you to answer a few questions for me. And so maybe you can remind me a little bit what we saw. So first of all, what kind of stereotypes did we hear about Indigenous people? Yeah, we hear about the laziness, the drug and alcohol addiction. What else did we hear?
Uneducated.
Yeah, that they're uneducated.
They drink.
They drink. Yeah, the drinking thing. Yeah, we hear that.
They don't pay taxes.
Yeah, that they don't pay taxes. Those are probably the biggest stereotypes or prejudicial ideas that are in existence. There's others, of course, but those are kind of the biggest ones. The idea that these people aren't really doing anything, that they're often addicted to drugs and alcohol, that they're not paying any taxes, right? So they're just getting a free ride from the Canadian government, kind of thing. And again, the problem with some stereotypes is that either there's a grain of truth to them, or the stereotype actually helps create it actually makes the stereotype come true in a way, right? So again, if you discriminate against Indigenous people and you don't want to hire them for any jobs, what can they do all day? Nothing. They're not going to work, right? And so you kind of create the stereotype, and you see a bunch of Indigenous people wandering around doing nothing, and you think, oh, why don't they get a job? And the question is, well, would you hire them? And a lot of people would say no, and therefore you just kind of create, you reinforce that stereotype by discriminating against them, right? We said that there is a stereotype about the use of drugs and alcohol in Indigenous communities, and to some degree that is true, right? That some communities have a big struggle with those things. And we said that that was an effect of intergenerational trauma from Indian residential schools and 60s scoop and racism and discrimination and all kinds of things, right? And so there's kind of a legacy of trauma here that doesn't go away after one generation. It takes a long time, and again, when people are in pain, any people, not just Indigenous people, when people are in pain, they usually try to find a way to make it go away, right? Do you not do that when you're in pain in some way? Do you try to find a way to make it go away? Yeah, if you have a headache, you take an aspirin, right? If you feel sad, maybe you watch a happy movie or call a friend, right? It's a normal thing to do, is to try to alleviate pain that people feel. And so these people, some of these people are doing just that. And again, drugs and alcohol aren't the best thing in order to heal yourself with or to moderate pain, but in some cases it's all these people have or all they know. And of course the tax thing, there are some benefits that Indigenous people get, but again, they're not fantastic in my opinion. And again, there's, how do I phrase this? Sorry, I'm still a little tired. I didn't sleep perfectly last night, and so I'm a little bit fuzzy. They are, the tax situation for them is slightly different, but again, the benefits that they get mostly have to do with if they work on their reservation. And in many cases, it's very difficult to earn a very good living on a reservation. There's usually not much there in terms of money or people or infrastructure or anything like that. And so it's kind of hard to make a living on a reservation. Most people have to leave the reservation and either work, in the oil fields or in mining or fishing, or actually come into the city and sort of get a city job, if you will. So again, there are some benefits, but they're not fantastic, and they usually require people to stay on the reservation. And in this case, if you want to make decent money, in lots of cases you have to leave your home and come to the city or somewhere else. And when you do, you pay income taxes just like everyone else does. Yeah, I'll ask you these. Why do you think a disproportionate or an overrepresented, why are Indigenous kids not finishing high school in greater numbers? Because they're what? They're getting bullied, yeah. Yeah, bullying and discrimination is part of it. What else? What's that? Yeah, internalized oppression can have something to do with it as well, right? If they're told that if you absorb cultural messages that your people are lazy and uneducated, then you may underperform at school, right? You may not do a good job. And it's very possible that teachers might also discriminate against you as well, because if they've absorbed those stereotypes, they might assume that, oh, well, you don't care about school, they're just not going to pay attention to you and not help you out, right? So some of these stereotypes can actually wind up coming true when you have kind of people internalizing social messages on both sides. I feel like you wanted to say something, Kang, no? Yeah, so Indigenous kids often feel like there's no place for them, right? At school, in the community, and often, yeah, their outcomes at school are not often great. Not often, but a third of them don't finish high school, and of course that's going to make it more difficult to get a job and to enter society and to kind of do all the things that normal, regular, quote, regular people do in society, right? If you don't have a job, if you don't have an education, yeah, you may find yourself living in the downtown east side, or you may find yourself homeless, or you may find yourself involved in criminal activity. And again, that's not just Indigenous people, that's anyone, right? Anyone who doesn't have options to make money in society is going to, wind up in a desperate situation, or they're going to turn to criminal activities, right? That has nothing to do with culture or ethnicity. It just has to do with how you can be successful in a society like this, right? I feel like I'm not doing a very good job explaining any of these things this morning, so I apologize.
Good, it's good.
No, it's iffy. what was Canada founded on? What did we say? On what? On negation, right? So again, in order for Canada to be born, if you will, these people had to be pushed aside. They had to be pushed out of the way, right? So Canada was often thought of as this big empty land, right? And the Europeans came and discovered this empty land, and they explored it, and they built Canada here. And that's, to some degree, that's true. But again, it wasn't empty, right? There were people living here that were in the way, right? And they had to be pushed aside in order for the Canada that we now live in to be created, right? And again, that's difficult because we do have a great country here. This is a great place to live, but again, it's been founded on, it's been founded on racism and discrimination and maybe a cultural genocide. And so that's difficult to kind of grasp, right? And to think about the thing that, yes, we have something good now and it shouldn't be thrown away or disqualified. But on the other hand, how it came about is not great, right? A lot of people were hurt in the process of creating this thing. And so now what do we do with that, right? What do we do when we have something that is good, but that has, the creation of it has hurt a lot of people? And how do we kind of mend that relationship? How do we fix that? What is Kent Monkman's art? How does Kent Monkman's art oppose the colonization process? Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of art, a lot of Western art that depicts Indigenous people. Again, it's Indigenous people through Western eyes, right? We see these people as we want to see them or as we prefer to see them, right? But Kent Monkman is trying to turn it around in sort of a somewhat playful, humorous way. Although not all of his art is playful or humorous, and some of it has actually really upset people. There was a very recent painting that he unveiled that actually a lot of people took offense to. And so, which is possible, right? Because the artist's job is to kind of push the boundaries and get people talking, right? And so sometimes it's possible to go too far. Whether he did or didn't go too far, I'm not really sure. But yeah, he plays with that gaze, right? So instead of Western people looking at Indigenous people and saying, here's who you are, here's who I see you as, Kent Monkman is turning it around and he's saying, okay, well, now us Indigenous people are looking at you, colonizers, and here's what we see, right? And so, he's turning it around and he's making you think about what you see and how you imagine things to be, right? How you envision Indigenous people to be and how you envision Western people to be. He's trying to play with those two things, and just get people talking, right? Because that's the job of art, right? Well, art has a few jobs, but one of the jobs of art is just to get people having a conversation about something, right? And so when he has a painting, I forget what it's called, but he has a painting where it's this beautiful mountain landscape, and then again there's this Indigenous guy with a Royal Canadian Mounted Police over his knee and his bare butt, and he's spanking his butt. It's kind of funny and kind of humorous, but it's to get people talking, right? And an image like that does grab people's attention and get them talking about things. And that's part of the artist's job. We heard from a couple people. We heard from Herb Dixon, well, two Herb Dixons. I guess one was junior and one was senior. But Herb Dixon Jr. was an artist, right? And so he had a photographic exhibit. He was showing his photographs at a kind of an art exhibition. And his dad has been living in the downtown east side, as has the younger Herb, for years, right? And it seems that he's kind of stuck there. It seems that he can't really get out. And why not? Why can't he just get out?
He has nowhere else to go. Like in downtown Vancouver, there's like a community that people gather there.
Okay, so he's kind of in this community, right? And I guess he's a part of it. What else is going on?
He can't find a job. They don't give him a job, so he's just stuck there.
Right. So again, I'm making an assumption. I don't know anything about Herb Dixon here, but I'm kind of assuming he has a story where maybe he didn't finish high school. He, left to go work on fishing boats when he was quite young, worked on these boats for quite some time, eventually came back when there was no work, and now he's an older person, but he has no skills, he has no high school diploma, he has no training of any kind, and so what kind of jobs can he get, right? And so seemingly not many. He's probably also fighting some racism and discrimination. I think they mentioned that he has a substance abuse problem as well. I don't know if it was heroin or something else, but so he's got kind of all these things, and they keep him trapped there, right? His lack of employable skills, if you will, maybe racism or discrimination that he may suffer, his own kind of internalized oppression about what he's worth as a person, right? And he might not feel confident enough to apply for jobs as well. He might think he's not good enough, right? And then, of course, if you have an alcohol or substance abuse problem, that makes it really difficult to hold on to a job, right? Because people who are addicted to substances often, eventually they'll wind up coming into work late, or they'll miss work, or they'll come into work a little bit buzzed or a little bit hungover, and of course that affects people's performance at work, and usually it results in them, being let go. So yeah, there's probably all kinds of reasons, and I think what you might find is if you talk to, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but if you went to the downtown east side and you talked to a bunch of people, you would probably find all kinds of different stories about why people are there, right? And it could be, there could be a history of trauma or abuse. They could have alcohol or substance abuse problems. They could have mental health issues that are untreated. They could have a physical disability or an injury that kept them from working, and now they can't work and they can't afford anything anymore. There's all kinds of different reasons why people kind of wind up in a situation like that. But yeah, once you're in there, it can become very difficult to get yourself out. Yeah, and so for Herb Dixon there, his sister Leslie says that he's always got a plan. He's always trying to kind of get out of that life and get out of that community, but he hasn't been able to yet, right? So it's more difficult than people might think, unfortunately. Okay. Do you want to watch the rest of it?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll watch the rest of it. Online people, I think we're about halfway through, so there's maybe about 20. Did we watch 20 minutes last time?
Yeah.
Or 20?
25.
25, okay. So I think there's about 20 minutes of it left. And so what we'll do is we'll watch 20 minutes. We will take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back here after that. So I'm going to put, let's see, how much of time am I going to put on the clock here? I'm going to put about 33 minutes on the clock just so we have enough time. Of course, just watch the second one, the YouTube link, if you missed it from Friday, and watch from 25 minutes onward. And then online people will see you in about a little less than 33 minutes. Okay? All right, go watch the rest of the video from 25 minutes to the end, okay?
in my life, you know.
Can do with that, but just be there for him when he reaches out to me.
Herb Varley is also struggling in the downtown East Side. He's trying hard to stay out of the life his father has fallen into. He's taking advantage of programs at the Urban Native Youth Association, a place that gives him new skills and training to become part of a community.
You know, it's just fantastic, and you see how much, if you have meaningful opportunities and culturally relevant programming and people who are just willing to listen, what kind of a difference it can make in the life of a young person. So Herb is a walking example of, you know, how much people can change.
He has branched out into photography, and this is opening night at a local art gallery, where his exhibit deals with the time he was briefly homeless.
One of the things we came to realize in this project is many people that are homeless are struggling with addiction issues.
But he's no longer sleeping in doorways.
This is where I live now. It's just a room, and this is 12 by 14. A jail cell is 12 by 8.
He invited his father to come tonight.
$160 a month. Yeah, he's gonna be here soon, supplementing my... I don't think he's actually ever really attended too many of my shows, but you know, tonight's a start.
His auntie Leslie showed up, and he still holds hope for his father. But at the end of the night, he's a no-show.
He wasn't really there when I was growing up, and I don't have any resentment towards that, because he was living his own life, he was going through his own struggles. For that entire time that residential school was in effect, our families were destroyed. And now we're really only relearning again how to be families without constant fighting, without constant bickering. Because we're just not used to it anymore, because our families were broken up.
I think what people need to realize is that things can change so quickly. I had such challenges growing up in my life, you know, all kinds of things, alcoholism and single parent and living in the projects, and my mother passed early. But when I look at my children, my daughter is a PhD student, my son is an established artist. So it gives me great hope for the future to see how much things can change within one generation.
It's a jungle out here, and I ain't gonna lie.
Here in Winnipeg, Brooklyn is in his neighborhood bar. This is familiar territory.
All these people we know in some way.
A refuge from the stresses of his music career. This is where he grew up.
Our mayor, she got murdered.
Jungle out here.
As a kid, Brooklyn already was a budding rapper. And he was a star athlete on a championship baseball team at his local community center.
Yeah, this used to be my rec center.
But he says things changed when they tore it down.
There's nothing in this area. They're just pretty much forcing kids back into the streets.
He's recognized as a celebrity and hero, but also for his criminal past. It continually comes back to haunt him.
In general, look, there's the bad guys right there. Hey, just watching. Watch, they'll come mess with us. They'll come mess with us for sure.
What's your name, sir?
Prefontaine.
Oh, yeah. Nice to meet you, right?
Yeah, you've met me. As far as that goes, same old. It's never gonna change. Never, no matter how good we do.
Brooklyn's friend Brett is arrested on an outstanding warrant.
That's not how you...
That's how I do it. That's how I
He will be released 2 hours later.
You guys ask about me every time you pull over one of my friends.
Everybody.
Say, where's Brooklyn, the drug dealer? You ask my brother. He got pulled over by you, and you asked him, where's the drug dealer at?
See that guy driving my car?
Yeah.
I stopped him too.
Yeah, he's a black guy, I guess
Oh
so.
my God. Okay.
It's either Indians or black guys then,
That's-
come on. It's like the same old shit, like you guys think we're up to
Nope,
something no
we're,
good,
we're,
you know?
we're in the neighborhood, we're rolling around, and we come into contact with
I make
people.
music now, that's
Well,
all I
I'm
do.
glad to hear
man.
that.
I change kids' lives and I try to change my own and this, you know?
And I change kids' lives too in this neighborhood by being out here day and night, making contact, making sure people are safe. So it's not
This is the delicate dance that Aboriginal youth and police often do on the city streets.
Yeah, that's continuous, man. Honestly, I'm so sick and tired of the stereotype.
Everyone is sick of the stereotype. Everyone wants things to change. But how do we do that?
As an Indigenous person, I have to know where I came from. And where I came from, again, less than 200 years ago, was the land. The land and the people were so interconnected.
What's the core thing that the land gives them? The land gives them wholeness and completeness. Well, let's figure out a way to give them that experience. No one says you have to pack up and move out to the bush. Well, you have to have a connection, you have to interact, and you have to draw spiritual and psychological sustenance from that. And then you can go and continue on in the life that you've chosen for whatever reason in an urban environment.
That connection to the land is important for many, no matter how citified. Even Jordan Tutu, the first Inuk ever to play in the NHL,
Here's a steal, Jordan Tutu!
needs to go back to his roots.
Obviously, the game has brought me to many places where I've never expected to be. Going to cities where it's just 24-hour nonstop. It's, you know, how do people live like this?
When the hockey season ends, he leaves the big city and connects to his home community in Rankin Inlet.
What are you in school here, or what?
I'm starting grade 1.
I always know that I have people that I can count on to understand me for, you know, Jordan, the kid that grew up here, not Jordan, the hockey player that is living the high life.
Oh, you're beautiful.
I definitely have a connection with nature.
I'm getting full of feathers.
You got to respect the land. You know, you really become a humble person when you appreciate what's given to you out there. Because, you know, down south, everything's just so fast-paced.
For me, we can be a native person that has a foot in the bush and a foot in the city, but really be who we are and in a modern world and being contemporary and modern.
Ideally, I would be very close to the land in order to practice some traditions. Given that I'm in the city, I obviously can't do that, but I still have a very close relationship with my creator, and that's something that I believe I'm able to do anywhere.
In most cities, the local Native Friendship Center has become the place to go for cultural activities. At the Friendship Center in Val-d'Or, a 7-hour drive north of Montreal, a new program is proving hugely popular with non-Native parents. An Aboriginal daycare where Native and non-Native kids play and learn about Native culture together.
We live in a city where there's a lot of Native people, so I find it interesting that at a young age they learn about each other's culture. I find it's a good way to counter racism.
When we opened our doors, we were hearing comments about the quality that could be not as high as a non-Native daycare because it's in a Native environment. But now we see that we have waiting lists of non-Native family in Val-d'Or that wish to have their children integrate this daycare.
Who am I? In a sense, it's the same problem that our ancestors faced when they were dispossessed and moved to the city in the first place. I used to be a hunter. Who am I now? Or what good am I now? They have to reinvent themselves, right? And some do and some don't.
Many Aboriginal people have lived in the city for generations with little connection to the culture. So many of our youth don't know their pasts or how colonization affects their lives. The boys from Winnipeg's Most want to understand their past so that they can move forward, but how do you do that? Well, they say wisdom lies with the elders.
So we arranged a meeting between Winnipeg's Most and elders Stella Blackbird and Audrey Bone to see what would happen.
Not knowing about my Aboriginal culture comes from my grandmother and my mom being in residential schooling and the stuff that was going on there where they were forced to be ashamed of who they were.
Yeah, it's a long struggle. But then you're well on your way. There, you're starting to think about it.
Our grandfathers, our grandmothers, they were not allowed to practice their ceremonies. They thought they took it all away from us, but you can't take away something you can't see. And that's our spiritual way of life. And we have that today. They couldn't take that away from us, and they never will.
I know it's going to take long, you know, for people to accept us. It's like that all over. I go in a store, I'm always being watched. You know, like I'm gonna put something in my purse. Today, those little things, they just bounce off me.
Brush it off. If we're looking at things that eroded our sense of who we are, there was also something called the 60s scoop. That's where throughout the 1960s and into the 80s, thousands of kids were taken away from their homes and adopted out, usually to white families. As one report stated, the road to hell was paved with good intentions, and the child welfare system was the contractor.
I don't remember any of this. I don't remember being this age. I don't remember getting off a plane. I don't remember hardly anything. Basically, I was put in almost like a catalog so that my parents can choose which child they wanted, and I guess they thought this was a really cute picture, so they chose me, and off I went from Manitoba right over to Montreal.
At the age of 3, Nakuset was adopted out to a Jewish family where her name was changed. Misguided social workers thought it would be better if she didn't identify as Aboriginal.
So I know that my mother used to try to tell people that I was Israeli because I'm dark, so that would sort of make a better story. You know, I was just a kid, you know, having a rough time, looking the way I do and being brought up. Like, I would go out with Jewish boys, and their parents would take a look at me and go,
She's hurt. Strangely enough, she discovered her Aboriginal identity through this 1990 Academy Award-winning movie.
It's kind of embarrassing, but I saw the movie Dances with Wolves, and then I became a born-again Indian. I was just like, wow, I'm gonna wear a braid now, I'm gonna wear a choker, and I did.
Against her parents' wishes, she began to explore her Aboriginal identity. She changed her name to Nakuset, which means the sun, a spirit name given to her by an elder. She began to feel she belonged somewhere. Now she runs a shelter for Aboriginal women.
So now what I need from the rest of you is, what are they going to be saying?
And works to bring all people together to improve lives.
Because we have to work together, and also I have a strong feeling that if we wait for the government to address our issues, that's never going to happen.
And at home, she's making sure her kids know who they are and where they come from.
I gave my children Aboriginal names, so people will know right away that they are. Since they're babies, they've been to powwows, so they're not going to have any issues about whether they are or not. They'll know they are.
Meet Ron Linklater. He really fusses over the new additions to his family.
Hey boys, how you doing?
Here's Dipper.
I take them out twice a day. I take them to their walks. They mean a lot.
He seems to live the typical suburban lifestyle. But it wasn't always this way.
I remember as a young boy growing up in the 60s and 70s being on welfare ourselves and having to go into these places in the city that gave meals out to people. Come on, baby, come on.
So he's thankful for what he has today, and he acknowledges it was hard to adjust.
Making friends, trying to live in a whole different environment, you know, it really was a struggle for me. And today I've accomplished that, and even more when I think back. Living in a larger urban center, I'm more successful today, and I know where I am part of a community today, and I try and respect other community cultures, other people that I meet in our neighborhood, for instance, get to know our neighbors, those sorts of things.
For Ron, the good life isn't about enjoying the benefits of the suburbs. It's about being true to his culture and traditions. And it's about sharing his knowledge with Canadians in his day job.
The Anishinaabe language.
Here it's with future counselors at Red River College in Winnipeg.
It's like they didn't know about our history yet. Growing up, you start to understand who you are as an Aboriginal man now. Once they started to realize that history or started to learn about that history, it started to change their attitudes towards the people, and for the better.
So is it they were affected by residential school, or there's no way to resist that kind of life?
Some of his students are new immigrants. He finds that some quickly adopt society's negative stereotypes about Aboriginal people. He loves to change their attitudes.
Before, I had a negative assumption about these Aboriginal people, but because I didn't know what's going on with their life.
Without the class, I perceive them negatively. But when I come to the class, now I know them. Who are they and what they are doing?
It seems Ron might just have one of the solutions. Get to know your neighbors. The more you know, the better it is. It's all about education.
That means raising the level of education for all Aboriginal people. Educating them in their own history so they can understand the past and begin to heal. It means educating non-Aboriginal people so that they get to know and understand us. It means bridging the divide between cultures, small steps, like here in Toronto, Winnipeg's most reaching out to mainly non-Aboriginal audiences. And it's about allowing Aboriginal culture to flourish rather than trying to kill it. It means adapting to specific needs, like this clinic in Val-d'Or that respects Native cultures. In the end, it's all about changing and strengthening the relationship between us.
A dialogue is created, it doesn't just happen out of the blue. A dialogue is built with time. It's built with people, individuals that believe in the fact that we're sharing the land.
The good life is where you and I can see each other on the street, find each other interesting, establish a connection, and build a relationship from there. That's the good life.
welcome back, everyone. So let's, what's that? Did I? Oh, yeah, we don't need that, do we? Gone. Okay, so there we go. One piece of Eighth Fire, and again, just a tiny little window into the world of what some Indigenous people are kind of experiencing and feeling and living and doing in the sort of modern country that we call Canada. Before I ask you maybe one more question, or maybe a couple more questions on this, I wanted to remind you about positionality. Do you remember what positionality is? Yeah, the fact that we kind of all see the world a little bit differently based on the social groups we belong to, right? So again, Kang's gonna walk down the street here in Canada. I'm gonna walk down that same street, but I'm a native-born Canadian. Kang is not. Kang is from Vietnam. So he's gonna see things and experience things a little bit different than I will, right? Kang's also quite a bit younger than I am, so we're also gonna see things differently in that way as well. And so here, I think this is an interesting documentary because I think it shows us that, right? It shows us that Indigenous people are, of course, living in the same Canada that we are, but they're kind of experiencing it in a slightly different way, or maybe not so slightly, maybe a not so slightly different way. So again, their reality is slightly different from ours, even though, again, we're living and working and existing in the same country and even in the same city, right? A lot of those, or some of those stories take place right here in Vancouver and right here on the downtown east side, which is just a little bit over there, right? So these stories are happening kind of right alongside our lives, but we're not kind of perceiving them, right? We're not seeing them or experiencing them that way. The last question I have for you here is that, again, one of the points of watching this documentary was the idea that these cultures they're living cultures, right? They were heavily damaged by the effects of colonization and by the Indian Act and Indian residential schools and various other actions of the Canadian government. Their cultures were damaged in the process, but they're still alive, and these people are kind of in the process of recovery, right? Of spiritual and physical and emotional and psychological recovery from, decades and decades of trauma. And so in what ways are First Nations people kind of reimagining and reclaiming their identity and culture? How do we see this happening in the documentary? Right. So we see that the sort of ceremonies and rituals and spiritual practices that were once banned are being taught, right? And they're being practiced again. The last woman we met, Nakuset, she references a powwow, right? So a powwow is kind of it's kind of a, how do I describe it? I probably won't describe it correctly. It's a big kind of ritual gathering. And so, First Nations people of various types will come together and they'll have kind of a big party, and there'll be, ritual dances and prayers and food and meeting and talking, and everyone will kind of, it's like a big Thanksgiving dinner, or if you will, or a Christmas dinner where everybody comes together, talks, reacquaints themselves with each other, has food. Sometimes there's a spiritual aspect to it. If you're a Christian family at Christmas, there might be a religious thing. So it's just kind of a big ritual celebration get together, right? So she says that her kids are going to those and she's going to them. And again, Indigenous people are engaging with that part of their culture, right? Since those things are no longer illegal, thank God. What else? Right, and so we see some people. Who do we see educating people about Indigenous culture? The last guy we saw with the dogs. Yeah, so Ron Linklater, I think we met, is a teacher at Red River College, right? And he's teaching Indigenous culture or Indigenous education to students, right? A lot of students who are international students, right? And that's pretty helpful as well, because I think some of the students said, oh, well, you know, I thought badly of Indigenous people too until I took this class. And that, I think that pretty clearly shows you the power of socialization, right? These people, or you people, come from another country, land in Canada, and all of a sudden you're absorbing social messages, right? So maybe some of those international students in the classroom 2 years ago or whatever, maybe they'd never heard of Indigenous people in Canada. And then, but they very quickly absorbed the social messages that circulate in society anyway, right? So socialization is powerful, right? And it's easy to pick up stereotypes and prejudices without even realizing that you have, right? And so that's exactly what happened to those Indigenous students, and Ron Linklater is kind of providing some education, right? So that they better understand what that experience of Indigenous people is like. What else is there? Yeah, there's a few things. There's a few interesting things going on at that daycare, right? And I think you hit on a few of them. Number one, the fact that, you know, young Indigenous kids can be kind of cared for in a culturally relevant context, right? Their daycare or their little home care is based around teaching Indigenous ideas and philosophies and stories, right? So that's helpful for young Indigenous kids, because even from a very early age, even if their parents have to go to work and these kids go to daycare, they can still continue to be brought up kind of within their culture or with their cultural ideas, right? Secondly, it serves as a method of education, right? Because there's non-Indigenous kids mixed into that group as well. And so they get to learn at the same time what these other kids are, what their culture is like, right? And there's a third thing which I think you almost implied, and if you didn't, I apologize, but I think you almost implied that, or I was thinking when you said, the other thing that I think the daycare does is it creates space for Indigenous ideas and people, right? And so again, you can sort of reclaim your culture and start to practice your ideas, but you kind of need a little space to do it, right? And so, like, I think we're seeing that in Canada, and particularly in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland here, with a celebration like Diwali, right, which happened over the weekend. And Diwali is kind of the Hindu or Indian festival of light, I believe. And it was interesting because, of course, the Indian community was kind of celebrating this holiday over the weekend, and you saw some pictures and Twitter feeds and things like that about, you know, hey, this celebration is going on. But what you also saw was political leaders like Joe Biden, like Prime Minister Trudeau, like Jagmeet Singh from the NDP. You saw these leaders tweeting and Instagramming and saying, hey, you know, to all of our South Asian friends in Canada or in the Lower Mainland, you know, happy Diwali. I hope, you know, I wish you all the best, kind of thing. And that's important too, right? Because that creates some space for those people to do what they do. It's a little bit of education, right? So people who might not have any idea what is going on with these people read these tweets or see these news reports, and they're like, oh, okay, there's a festival of light. Now I know what that is, right? And so, again, it creates some space for people to actually practice and reclaim that culture. And so, again, I think the daycare does a good job of that, of making people aware of indigenous culture and philosophies and values, and it gives them some space to practice in, right? And again, the space is not literal, it's metaphorical space. But still, I think it does that too, which is cool, I think. Other ways in which they're kind of reclaiming or reimagining their identity.
I think the last woman who named her children with the Indian names.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess maybe that fits under the umbrella of kind of putting that culture into practice, right? And so following rituals that they've followed, you know, sort of making some space for their culture to exist and to breathe. And part of that is the naming, right? So when these kids go to school or when these kids introduce themselves, they're not going to introduce themselves as, you know, Bobby or something very white. They're going to introduce themselves as an indigenous person, right? And so those names create some space as well, right? They signify to the society that this person is indigenous, this person belongs to a community, and this community exists, right? This community exists and lives and breathes and is now in your face talking to you, right? And so it's not, you know, the culture is not hidden, it's not, you know, out of sight over here somewhere, it's kind of right in front of you, right? It's speaking to you directly. And so the naming is actually a very easy way of putting that culture kind of in the forefront, right? And making space for indigenous culture to kind of, yeah, to breathe, right? So the naming is a good one.
So do they write in their own language, or is it just in...
It is. What they've kind of done, since I think almost all indigenous languages were, their cultures were non-literate, so they never wrote anything down. And so what indigenous cultures and with the help of linguists and anthropologists have done, they've borrowed symbols from, let me show you something here. Hang on. Where is it? It's
There's some of them when we go to Squamish or something, I think.
Yes.
They have some 7.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I'm just going to show you very quickly here. Oh no. Hang on. Where is it? There it is. So this is something that we've crafted here at the college. So we've created this this statement of indigenous recognition, if you will. And so I'll just show this to you really quickly. This is the quickest way I could find it, so it's not perfect. Nope, that's not right. There it is. Yeah, so this is from a meeting that we had, and you can see here there's a statement of indigenous recognition. And so you can see there's kind of three indigenous groups that sort of traditionally lived in the Vancouver area. And so there's Coast Salish people, which is kind of a broader term, and then there's some smaller groups including Musqueam, Squamish, of course Squamish is named after these people, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And so there's kind of three groups that are under this umbrella of Coast Salish. And so you can clearly see how they've kind of created their own written language based on borrowing some of the characters that we already know, right? So like Anna mentioned, there's a 7 in there, which is a certain sound. I don't know all the sounds. There's kind of a backwards, there's an upside down E in there. There's an upside down E there. There's an I with a little accent. There's a theta. There's a backwards Y. And so you can see they've kind of taken some characters that already exist and assigned them to different sounds, right? Because of course their languages are all going to have a different set of tones and sounds that make up the language. And so they've kind of borrowed some script from English, some from Greek. They borrowed a few numbers and question marks and things like that, and accents and things, and they've used that to build an alphabet, basically. And now they can write these things down in a way that they couldn't do before. So yeah, there's no kind of traditional Indigenous script or written language, and so one has been created in order to kind of record and preserve and transmit this language. Because, and we can actually, this is a bit of an aside, but it's very on topic. A lot of these languages are, some have gone extinct, and many of them are endangered. And so on the north coast of Vancouver, what's the language called? It's called, shoot, I cannot remember the language, but the language that they used to speak on the north coast, and some people still do, I think there's something like 11 speakers of that language left. And so those people are working very hard to record the language, but also to teach it to their young people, because it's just on the verge of disappearing. And so things like this are very important, using symbols to create a written language so that you can record and transmit this information before it disappears, right? Because if you don't write a language down and nobody speaks it anymore, poof, right? Gone. And language is an important part of culture, is it not? Would you say so? There's, do I have it in this course? I don't think I do. In anthropology, there's, or in linguistics, there was a theory called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, okay? And it's taken some criticism, but it's interesting to think about. The hypothesis is this, that, we've talked about how our culture and our socialization forms kind of frames through which we see the world, right? Sapir and Whorf, they say that your language does exactly the same thing, because the way that your language works and how it kind of divides up the world greatly influences how you perceive the world and how you think about it as well. So, for instance, who in this room speaks more than one language? Everyone, right? Have you ever noticed that when you're translating from your first language to English, or English back to your first language, do you find that things don't translate perfectly sometimes? Like you've just got to think about the meaning of what's being said, and then you just say it in your own language, or vice versa, because it just doesn't go word for word, right? You can't just go back and forth. And that's kind of part of what's happening there, is that your language and the English language have kind of divided up the world a little bit differently, right? We've classified and categorized things and encoded meaning in different ways. And so because we've done that, for you to think in your first language is actually a different experience than thinking in English. And so Sapir and Whorf say that actually influences how you can think about things and how you see the world based on how your language actually works, which is really interesting. But how it relates to this is that, again, that means every language that exists in the world is kind of a unique human way of seeing the world, right? And so if you speak Vietnamese or Mandarin or Farsi or Swahili or Japanese, whatever you speak, Cantonese, whatever you speak, that's a unique way of seeing the world, right? And so if your language dies, then that unique way of seeing the world is gone too, right? And it's gone in a way that cannot be recovered if it's not written down, right? So languages are a critical part of culture, because the culture is encoded in the language, and then the process of teaching the language also helps to teach the culture, right? So to lose the language is a major, major loss for a cultural system. And so again, there are Indigenous languages that have already disappeared, and we don't know. We know they existed, but that's all we know. And then there are some that are kind of on the verge of disappearing. And so communities are working very hard to preserve them and teach them so that they don't disappear.
If they were non-written languages to begin with, to write it and create a writing out of it, isn't that a hit to its integral part of the language as well?
Is creating a writing system after the fact a hit to its integrity as a language?
Yeah, like if it wasn't written at all, you're trying so desperately to record it down that it wasn't made with that intent from the start. It's hard to keep it, like, do it justice by recording it down. You know what I mean?
I do, and I think in some ways I would agree with you, and in some ways I would disagree with you. I would disagree in that basically all languages were created as non-written languages, so they all languages pick up their writing system later on, unless you work for like Game of Thrones and you just invent Dothraki, in an afternoon. Then of course that doesn't count. But I think all languages originally appeared and were non-written, and the writing system comes usually much later. I would agree with you in that, yeah, it is a non-traditional thing for these groups to do, right? So again, they never wrote anything down, and so now you're kind of adding something to the culture that actually never existed in the first place. So yes, you are kind of monkeying with the language a little bit. But I would also say that maybe that's a better thing than having your language vanish altogether. That's a bad thing. The other thing I might mention too is that if you're really into this sort of thing, that's what linguistic anthropologists and linguists actually do. So they spend their time analyzing the heck out of how languages work. And so how sounds go together, what kind of sounds there are, how sounds differ between languages, how meaning is encoded in words, and how words differ. It's actually pretty interesting. I don't know a lot about it because the linguistic anthropology class I took at university was not very good. Sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry. It wasn't very good. That class was not very good, but it's a really interesting field to look at and to understand how languages work, because they're fascinating. And so some of the sounds that you see, like, when you go into Wikipedia and it gives you a word and then it shows you how to pronounce it after, and sometimes the symbols are weird.
Yeah, I can never pronounce it. Why did they put it there?
Because those are linguistic symbols. And so linguists have a whole alphabet of their own that describe basically every sound that humans use in language. And so there's a massive, I don't know how many different sounds humans use, but every language only selects a few sounds to use. And I don't mean letters, I mean actual sounds you make with your mouth. And so there's a huge catalog of sounds that humans can make, but not every language uses all those sounds. It just uses a selection. And so you'll see those too. If you're trying to learn another language, you'll probably encounter at least one or two letters that are hard to pronounce, right? Because you don't have them, you don't have those sounds in your language, right? Or the sounds that we put together, you would never put together in your language, right? Is there any sounds that you, in learning English, that you kind of stumbled with that were hard to do?
No, but you guys can pronounce the.
Yeah, because it's back, right? The huh, it's way back there. Yeah, yeah. That's one that we don't use, right? What are some other ones that are tricky between languages? With Cantonese?
No, with Japanese.
With Japanese, is that true, Yukimi? Yeah. So the L's and the R's are. How does it work?
It's like library would be hard
Is there an L or an R sound in Japanese? There's neither of those sounds? Oh, okay. So those are tricky, right? Because you don't have them. I think th is a difficult one. I don't think every language has a th. That's a weird one. And I think W is weird too. W. Like I don't think a lot of, do your languages have a W sound? W. What? I think it's kind of an odd sound. I know, because I've taken Russian, and Russian has no W, so they often substitute a V for a W. Russian has no j sound. So like Jennifer, like the name Jennifer, there's no j at all. They just have a hard G, like Gary or great. So there's no j sound. So again, every language is a little bit different, right? They choose certain sounds, and then certain sounds don't get used. But linguists have a full catalog of every sound that humans use in language, and so when they write those little things in Wikipedia, that's kind of a phonetic spelling so that you know exactly how to pronounce the word. Because again, when you transliterate things, when you write things that are in one language in another language, they don't work. They don't sound right? I don't even know where we are. We've kind of like gone off on a tangent. I don't know what we're talking about. What? We're talking about linguistic anthropology. Linguistics is kind of its own field, although anthropologists study language as well because language is such an important part of culture and a mechanism to transmit culture. And so linguistic anthropology is kind of a subfield of anthropology. You have social cultural anthropology, archaeology, physical or biological anthropology, and linguistic anthropology. You usually have 4 subfields. So anthropologists do study linguistics pretty heavily. And it's very interesting. It's too bad my course kind of sucked in it because it's very interesting. But okay, how else? How else are these people reclaiming their cultural identity? People teaching them? Like who? Yeah, there's a professor who teaches this stuff at university, right? So there's some pretty high-level thinking going on about how this group might actually reclaim what they lost, especially since the country they live in is not the country that their ancestors lived in, right? So and I think the professor asked that question, right? He's like, it's about who am I, right? Like I used to be a hunter, or my ancestors were hunters who were connected to the land. Now I'm living in a high-rise apartment working on a computer. So how do I connect those things, right? How do I take what I was and use that to understand who I am, even though my current experience is very different from the ones that my ancestors lived? What has happened here, especially since Indigenous people didn't get a choice, right? Change was imposed on them. They didn't say, hey, let's invite a bunch of Europeans in here to, modernize our country. That's not what happened, right? So they didn't choose what happened, but now they have to figure out how to make sense of it. What else? Anything else?
I think the Dixon song was portraying some pictures of who he was and where he was living.
Oh yeah, the artist, yeah. So I guess they're expressing themselves and sort of figuring out their identity through artwork, right? So could be sort of a modern style like photography, but also through more or animation, right? We saw the artist at the beginning of when we watched on Friday, the comic book artist, the animated artist. He's sort of doing something with his culture as well, with this kind of new new medium, right? Through animating on a computer. And so Herb Dixon's doing the same thing. He's kind of communicating and understanding his experience through photography, right? So there's kind of a mix of old and new a little bit too, right? Kind of taking from the past, but also trying to make that fit in the present somehow, right? Art, music, because Winnipeg's most, education, childcare.
Also the documentary itself is teaching them.
Nice one. Yeah, the documentary itself is part of that process, right? So this thing here that we just watched, that aired on CBC, right? CBC is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I assume millions of people watch it, or at least millions of people who still have cable TV, which is fewer and fewer, but still, you can see it online if you want. We saw it on YouTube. So it's doing some education as well, right? It's allowing us to meet the neighbors, as Wab Kinew says, right? It's allowing us to just get to know a few Indigenous people, even if it's only on screen, right? Getting a glimpse of who these people are and what they're doing and what their experience is like, right? Oh yeah.
So even though they might live in the city and have a different life, completely different, their culture and what they're brought up and taught to know, they still go back and eat it.
Yeah, they said it. The connection with the land is a very important thing, right? And so here we have very successful National Hockey League player Jordan Tutu, right? And Jordan comes down and plays the season and flies all around the U.S. and Canada and plays hockey games in front of thousands of people and probably makes millions of dollars. But then season's over, goes back home, right? So that he can reconnect with his friends and his family, but also with the land, right? With the place that he's from, right? And again, in Indigenous culture, the land is much more important than it is in most of our cultures, or at least in Western culture. I won't speak for anyone else's, but yeah, here in the West, land is a resource to be developed, right? It's a commodity. It's something with which you turn a profit with it, right? Whether you farm it, or whether you cut down timber, or whether you mine it, or whether you turn it into an amusement park or a golf course. Land is a commodity to be made money off of, right? But for Indigenous people, that's not what it is. It's a part of who they are. It's what has taken care of them in the past. It's closely linked to their spirituality, and so land is not a commodity, right? And land is not a thing to be made money off of. Land is something that you care for, and if you care for it, it will care for you. It's not to say that no Indigenous groups make money off land. That's not true, but traditionally the two cultures are very different that way in how they imagine land, because the West has no attachment, no spiritual attachment to land in any way, but the Indigenous people do. What else? Anything else?
And I think the books that we were studying, like for example in our English classes, we always have that section for Indigenous people's literature and stuff.
Yeah, and that's good, and that's an education piece as well. And so in the past few years, the BC curriculum has been kind of rolling out, and it's been adding more and more First Peoples principles and content, right? So there's a real drive to educate people about First Nations perspectives and culture and experience. And so this all courses are kind of being asked to do that. And so with English and with social justice, it's pretty easy. It's a little more tricky with math, but again, that's what teachers are being asked to do, is to sort of integrate this in some way. That's good. Do we miss anyone else or anything else?
So, do they have any famous like paintings?
Indigenous people in general? Yeah, there's lots of artwork. There's lots of artwork out there, and so if you go to what is it? The museum, MOA, Museum of Art downtown. Vancouver, yeah. Why can't I remember? Vancouver Art Gallery? Oh yeah, Vancouver. Yeah, so if you go to Vancouver Art Gallery, if you go to the Museum of Anthropology, if you go to the Royal Museum of BC in Victoria, you'll see lots of Indigenous artwork. Traditionally, most of their artwork is not like a painting. Most of it is either carved, like carved wood, or objects, or sometimes clothing. But painting is kind of it's more of a European thing that people do, but then they use their traditional art, use their traditional styles on when painting.
So they have some way to advertise their culture.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things that the Museum of Anthropology does really well. It's a way to learn about their culture, but it's also a museum in which Indigenous people are involved with. So it's not that sort of colonial gaze like Kent Monkman says. It's not like, here's a museum and this is how we see you, Indigenous people. Instead, it's Indigenous people saying, this is who we are, right? This is what you should know about us, kind of thing. So it's a little bit of a different perspective, and probably a better one. Definitely a better one. And it's a great museum.
I'm not sure about the name of them, but I think Northshire or something, the balanced stones they have near English Bay, I think.
Oh yeah.
They say it's for First Nations.
Yeah, what you're seeing, and there's one kind of way out there, kind of along Beach Avenue. There's a really tall one. Yeah, those are. I'm hoping I'm going to get this right. They're called Inukshuks. Yeah, and Inukshuks are kind of an indigenous thing that people do, but usually to the far north. So it's not something Indigenous people around here would have done, but they kind of serve as marking posts. So if you're, way up north and it's all white and snowy and cold, these Inukshuks serve as kind of place markers for different things. And so that's as much as I know about them. There might be more to them, but they're something that comes from the very kind of far north of Canada, but they built one here for some reason. I don't know. It's cool. It looks cool. I'm not sure why it was built here, but yeah, but it is an Indigenous thing. Yeah. What else? Nothing else? Okay. That is about all the time we have. We have a few more minutes, but that's okay. I'm in the process of marking your papers, and I will try to get them back to you as soon as possible. And I will try to assign you a final paper tomorrow, just so you can get a head start on it. Avera's kind of cringing and going, "Oh dear Lord." But well, the more time you have, the better it will be, right? Right? Okay. That is all for today then, my friends. I will bid you adieu, and I'll see you tomorrow. So bye, online people.